Hello everyone and welcome to this drawing tutorial. As you can see, we're doing a sunflower, and first I'm using a blank piece of paper to familiarize myself with this piece. First, I'm outlining the part for the central part of the flower, and I'm noticing that it has different levels. And also I'm outlining the petal placement just to get a feel to see how much space do I need for different sections. Here I'm noticing that the petals are fairly basic and that the central part is divided into three sections. The first one that's shaded a bit lighter, the middle section that's darker, and the central part that's going from lighter towards darker when you get closer to the center. And here I'm just using some random shading to see what am I going to do in the sketch. You don't have to do this part. This is just a way to see how can we familiarize ourselves with this piece. Now I'm going to use my sketchbook to plan out the spacing. I'm doing one oval shape for the central part, one oval shape for the petal placement, just to see how much space do I need for every single part over here. And then for the central part, I'm dividing it into three sections. The outer sections are a bit thinner, and the very central part is a bit wider than the rest of it. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to plan out the petals. First, I'm drawing only the petals that I see completely, that are not overlapping in any way. So you can see that they're a bit spaced out. I'm loosely basing them off of the photo reference. Here you can just do widely spaced out first layer, and then do some of them that are overlapping, that are appearing behind completely. And now I'm doing that layer just to see how many of them do I need behind the first layer of petals. Maybe in some cases I see that a petal is missing in some place and I'm going to add it. Here you don't have to completely base it off of the photo reference, but it'll be good if you're starting out to look how many of them are appearing between the two petals in the first layer that we made previously. That'll be easier for you definitely, so you can do that. I am trying to do that as much as I can, but if I see that something is missing, I will add one petal behind just to fill in the gap. And when I'm done with that, I will do the stem and the leaves. But honestly, they're optional because we're going to focus mostly on the flower part in this tutorial. Now I'm using my pencil to shade in the central part. Here I'm just loosely shading it in with some random shapes and strokes. It's a bit messy at this stage, but this will help us figure out the depth of that middle part and the shading that appears on the very center and the very edge of this central part of the flower. Then I'm using my technical pencil to do these tiny little lines that I'm noticing that they appear on the very outer layer of the center. They are close to the middle part. They look like they are outlining that section and dividing it into two. So I'm trying to replicate things that I see on the photo reference. It's not super perfect, it's not super detailed, but it will help me later on when I do the shading for the middle part. Here you can see I'm doing a bunch of tiny circles to shade in the middle part of this center, because as you can see in the photo reference, it's really dark than the rest of the center. So I'm just using a bunch of tiny little circles to shade in everything. And my tip for you is to use a pencil first before inking, because if you make a mistake or if you see that something feels off, you can easily fix it in this stage. That's why I prefer to do everything in pencil first and then do the ink later. Here now I'm doing the very center part, and I'm noticing that it has that geometrical pattern going on. If you really zoom in into the photo reference, you will see it. The very central part has that whirl-like pattern going on, so I'm trying to replicate that with my pencil using a lot of tiny dots again, but this time they are really going to follow that pattern. For the middle part, you don't really have to do that because it will not be as noticeable when we ink it will be really dark. So only for the complete center, you're going to follow that pattern. And here you can see I'm really going in and adding a lot of strokes, a lot of circles. And when I get close to the very center, I'm adding a couple of them more just to add more shading, because when you see that photo reference, it has more shading in the very center. And when I'm done with the very center, I'm going to do the outer layer of the central part. Here I'm using zigzag motions to create something that resembles a mini flower or something like that, so I can create the details in this portion. They're not circular, they're not straight lines or anything. They look like a bunch of tiny flowers, so I'm adding that zigzag motion to replicate that. And also I'm doing a lot of small strokes here to add as much details as I can in this one. And this part is a bit tedious, but it really helps you when you do the pencil sketch first. It really helps you see how many details are here, what they need to shade more, what they need to shade less, on how different portions of the central part behave. And here I'm adding a bit more shading because I'm noticing that it lacks shading in some places. And when I'm done with everything over here, I'm adding a bit more shading between the petals because I'm noticing that it's darker everywhere and I want to replicate that part. When I'm done with this portion and when I shade everything between the petals, I'm noticing if something is missing, do I need to add something? And if it's okay, I'm going to start shading in the petals just to plan out the placement of strokes that I will going to add when inking. Here you can go loosely just to try to replicate that. And when everything's laid out, I'm going to use my 0.3 fine liner to outline the petals. Here, just go slow, get some coffee or tea or something and start inking. Be really patient with it. My tip for you is to start outlining one petal at a time, and if you see that something is overlapping, be really careful not to do a stroke that you don't want to. And here I'm really going in patiently, working with things that I see first, and when I ink them, I'm going to do things that are appearing behind or that are overlapping so I don't create any mistakes in this portion. Because you can get carried away and you can start creating different lines and make a mistake where some things are overlapping, so be really careful and just follow your pencil sketch. Notice where some petals bend, where some petals are a bit twisted, because every single one of them is unique. And if you see that some things are missing maybe in your sketch, you can add a petal behind just to fill in the gap. But when you're done with that, you can do the stem and the leaves, even though, again, that's optional. And I'm just doing some zigzag motions for the edges of the leaf, just to make it look a bit more realistic. And I'm adding a couple of veins here and there, not basing them off the photo reference at this point, but this is it for them. And when I'm done with that portion, I will now show you how are we going to create this line part. We're going to outline them basically because when we ink them, we need that lighter space that we can see in the photo reference. It won't be noticeable when we ink it only with a line. When we start shading in some things, it will disappear. So every single line that we made previously, we're going to outline it, and that will be it for that part. Here, if you see that some things are missing, you can add them in this portion. If you see that you need a couple of them more in some spaces, in the photo reference, you can see it at the very top of the central part and the bottom left edge. And when you're done with outlining the lines that you made previously, you can start with filling in the middle layer of the central part. Again, we're going to add a bunch of tiny circles to make it look really dark and shaded in. So here you can see I'm adding a lot of tiny little circles. Sometimes they're like a loop or something because it won't be as noticeable, but I'm focusing on circular motions to fill in this space that's darker in our pencil sketch. And first I'm outlining everything that's closest to the lines that we outlined previously. And when I'm done with that portion, I will start going in towards the very center until I get to the part that's lighter. Then I have to switch to 0.1 because I prefer to really dig into the paper when I ink. So if you do that too, switch to something lighter or use really light hand to do the very central part. Here you can just go in, do as many tiny circles as you need to until you get that really shaded in part for the middle section of the center. And as you can see, it's not completely perfect or completely circular. It's a bit thinner and thicker in some places, so you can do that also. When I'm done with that, I'm going to shade in and the central part, and I'm using 0.1. As you can see here, I'm going to follow that whirl pattern. I'm trying to replicate the movement on this piece of paper, and I'm trying to do that on the sketch. I'm doing a bit bigger circles in this part because they need to be a bit noticeable than the middle part, because we need to see them clearly and they need to follow this pattern. As you can see here, I'm trying to replicate that as much as I can, as close as I can. And if I sometimes get lost, like I did in this top portion, I spaced out a couple of lines, a couple of patterns here, so I can get the most perfect result as I could possibly get in this sketch. And when I get to the very center, I want to do a bit more circles to get that really shaded in portion. And when I'm done with the central part, I need to do the outer layer of the center. And on the piece of paper I'm showing you, I'm doing some zigzag floral-like motions to get that texture, because it's not a circle, it's not a line, it's something in between. So I'm adding something that looks like a tiny little flowers to fill in this space, because when you zoom in into the photo reference, you can see that pattern. It's a bit pointier. I'm trying to replicate that in this portion here with that zigzag movement. And when I'm noticing that I get close to the petal, I would prefer to add a bit more shading over there, because I'm noticing that I can see something like that in the photo reference. Here you can really zoom in into the photo reference to see how this portion behaves. It's a bit trickier than the middle part and the central part, but it's fairly easy to make when you just follow that zigzag pattern and do something like that. It will look really good at the end. So just be patient and add as many tiny details that you need. And when you're done with that, you can see clearly if something needs a bit more details. Here, I'm just fixing some things. If I see some tiny gaps or some things that are missing, if I see something that needs a bit more shading, I'm going to add it over here. And that portion is basically finished. I'm also adding a bit more shading between the petals because I'm noticing that I can see them on the photo reference. When I'm done with this portion, I'm also going to add a bit more shading to the very center because I'm noticing that it could use a bit more work. But when I'm done with that, I'll switch back to 0.3 to start outlining the petals. And here, because the sunflower petals are fairly simple, I'm just going to shade in the portions that go from the bottom part of the petal towards the edge first. Here I'm trying to follow the movement of the petal. If it's bending towards left or right, I will try to replicate that. If it's appearing a bit more straight, I will try to add a bit more dimension to that so it won't look as plain as it could be. And I'm really focusing on the very bottom part of the petal. I'm not going towards the edge completely. At this point, when I'm done with every single one, I will start shading the petals from the edge towards the bottom part. And here now I'm really focusing on the very edge and trying to do some overlap towards the middle part of the petal so I can add a bit more depth and a bit more dimension. And here you can honestly focus on your personal preference and you can do things that feel good to you, that feel right to you. You can look at the photo reference and see how every single petal behaves. They have a good structure and good shading in some portions. For the bottom part of the flower, you can see that it's a bit more shaded because it looks like the sun hits it differently than the top part of the flower. So you can add a bit more shading on that part. For the top part, you can really go in and look to see which petals overlap, so you can add a bit more shading over there, so you can add a bit more dimension. And you can do as many lines as you want to or as little as you want to. That's based on your personal preference. I prefer to add as many as I could. And here you can see I switched to 0.1 to add a bit more shading. But with a fine liner that's thinner, you don't have to worry about shading in too much. You can do 0.1, you can do the smallest one that you can possibly find, and do as many lines as you want to until you get that perfect drawing that you want to make. Here I really want to do a lot of strokes until I get the feel that I see in the photo reference. Here now I'm focusing on the edges in the bottom part because it appears like it's a bit more shaded in that part. On the petals, they're a bit wavy and they bend in different ways, in some different placements. And when I see that some things are overlapping, I will add even more shading over there so I can create that 3D-like look in this drawing. Here, if you are happy with your result, you can pause it and call it a day. And also you can color it in with a medium that you prefer. Here I'm just going to add a bit more shading and focusing on things that are overlapping so I can create as many details as I can to replicate that photo reference. I will link it down below so you can download it. It's free to use for anything, so it's good for practicing. But here you can see at the end I'm doing the edges and adding a bit more shading in some places that I see on the photo reference that are a bit darker. And when I'm done with that, when I'm happy with the result, I can start by zooming out and looking if something needs a bit more details, if something needs a bit more work. At this point, honestly, you can see what feels good to you, what feels right to you. At the end, I'm inking the stem and the leaves. I'm trying to replicate that fuzzy-like texture that the stem has. And for the leaves, I honestly haven't used the photo reference. I just went in and shaded in some portions that I feel like they could use some work. And for the leaves, I'm using the same principle that I used for the petals. I'm shading in from the center towards the edges and from the edges towards the center part. And honestly, you don't have to do this. As I said previously, we are not using a photo reference to base this part, to work on this part. So this is just an optional part that you can create, but using the same principles that we used for the petals until we get that shaded in look. And honestly, this would be it for this portion. I just noticed that the central part is a bit off center, so I tried to fix it, and that will be it. I hope this video was useful, that you learned something. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like this one. I will start creating more drawing tutorials like this detailed one so we can learn and follow along with me. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below if you want to see something else in my next video, and until then, ciao!